This conference will now be recorded.
And then I'm going to go in the latter part, then I'm just going to share briefly two web-based tools that we've developed at the SERCC. Okay, so first I want to point out, so we're funded by NOAA, and there's 6 of us scattered out across the country. You can see our footprint there. So we start in Virginia, we go down to the west or southwest down to Alabama and Florida, and we also include Puerto Rico there. And so we're basically provide a hub for climate services. We monitor the climate closely, we carry research out on it, and of course we do a lot of education in the Southeast. And we've been around for a long time, so a lot of us started in the 1980s. I did not get involved until 2007, and I've been directing the Climate Center, I guess now for the last 12 years. And so some of the things just to point out that we really focus on, we really value direct interaction and engagement with climate stakeholders. And so we see ourselves a lot as in terms of translating weather and climate information and learning a lot about what the needs are, basically the different ways in which weather and climate extremes, the ways in which that makes various sectors vulnerable. And I absolutely love this job because I'm always learning, kind of learning new things. We also are experts in the distribution of accurate and unbiased climate data products and information. And so we have a full-time service climatologist, William Schmitz. You can call him up and literally talk to him or send him an email if you've got any questions or you're needing any kind of weather or climate data. We focus on applied research, and we develop decision support tools. And again, as I mentioned on the prior slide, where a lot of what we do involves education of stakeholders. And so here's just sort of a Venn diagram, sort of showing the different things that we do there. It's wonderful that we're on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill. So we employ grad and undergrad students. They carry out the research, and then that research then gets translated oftentimes into the development of various products. And so I should also mention that I am a member of CISA, and much of the team is down in Columbia, South Carolina. I've been working with them more than a decade, and so a lot of that work has been around engagement with stakeholders. And so a lot of the work that I'm showing you here has also been funded by CISA. And so a lot of our work around heat, and I'll just focus on that right now, is around field work, measuring variables that affect heat. And we've been looking at this at a very local to basically a micro scale. So looking at different land cover surfaces, a lot of our work, for example, has been on high school campuses and looking to see how heat stress, how it varies locally. And we've developed a web-based tool that predicts it over the next 5 days. And so I'll show that to you all here in a little bit. And part of our engagement with them is that we've literally gone out to about, I would say, 8 or 9 different high schools across the state. So we've gone to their fields, and in some cases, we've made measurements ourselves. We've talked a lot with high school athletic trainers. They're the ones that are typically tasked with measuring this something called wet bulb globe temperature or heat stress. And so they advise coaches on what they can do and what they can't do based on basically on how dangerous the heat is. We've also had engagements with athletic directors, trainers, and coaches on heat safety. We have a very close relationship with the North Carolina High School Athletic Association, so they've sponsored a couple events. The last 2 years, as you can imagine, these events have been virtual, but we've had very wide participation here in North Carolina. In one sense, I should put this out here that this is something that we can do with any group around heat safety. And so I realize it's a real diverse audience. And so if you want to learn more about heat, or if you want one of us to give a virtual presentation or just talk with you about it, we'd be more than happy to do that. I just want to point out one image here on the far left. So we've done a lot of field work with heat stress, and so we measure meteorological variables. We have a Kestrel instrument that's over on the far left here. which is an instrument that's commonly used by high schools, costs about $400. And then we have an actual wet bulb globe thermometer. I'll define what wet bulb globe temperature is here in a second. And this is a Quest unit that costs about $3,000. And I don't know of any high schools that have ever bought one, but this is an actual thermometer that measures heat stress, where the Kestrel instrument basically provides an estimation. You can see it's next to an official weather station here. And so we've done a lot of field work to see, what are these different instruments, what are they measuring, and how close do they correspond with each other? Okay, so another facet of what we've done is, besides the science of it and measuring heat stress and so forth, we've done a lot of work over the years looking at the effects of heat. And a former PhD student of mine, Maggie Sugg, she's a professor at Appalachian State. In her PhD work, she was looking at heat-related illness in North Carolina, and we were able to get data. Basically, it was a virtual census of emergency room visits across the state. It was something part of a program called NC Detect. It's a syndromic surveillance system. And so she did this very detailed analysis where she merged the hospital emergency room data. Basically, she was able to get the patient zip code, the patient county, and various aspects of them, like their age and their gender, and so forth. And so she mapped this out across North Carolina. This is on the basis of about 7 years worth of data. So she calculated the rate of emergency room visits, what we call heat-related illness here. And then basically, it's a real scientific measure per 100,000 person years, but basically it's per capita. So what percent of the people in that particular area went to the emergency room? And you can see here, the actual values aren't important, but the differences really are. And so you see some of the light blue and the dark blue areas there, the values are relatively low. But you compare it to the orange and particularly the red, and there's on the order of an 8 and sometimes 10 times greater rate of heat illness in the red. So if you compare the red areas and the blue areas, so point being is this map shows tremendous variation in the rates of heat illness across North Carolina. The black circles here denote the major cities in North Carolina, and you can probably see that by and large where the cities are located, the rates of heat illness are markedly lower than what they are in the rural areas. And I'll point out a few of these rural areas that are really significant. This circle here denotes Fayetteville, and so south of there, basically this is Bladen County here. The rates are really high, and you see pockets where they're really high. And Maggie looked at land cover analyses and determined that these areas have a lot of labor-intensive agriculture. And so people are exposed a lot more to these heats. And that's generally what she found for areas with heat illness. It's not so much people that were, vulnerable because of their physiology, let's say being old or whatever, but rather it had much more to do with exposure, basically exposure to the heat. And I think I have another slide here that I can show on this. Yeah, so this is just one of the plots here. She divided the study area into 4 groups, and I just want to focus on what she called rural and isolated. So a lot of these are areas where there's a lot of agriculture. And so this is by age and the rates of heat illness. And what we see is that the greatest rates of heat illness were basically 18 to 24 years of age. Okay, and so it peaked there, and then you see it kind of generally goes down, and then it really goes down when you get down to the age groups 65 to 74, and then it starts to go back up again. So people that are obviously elderly people are going to be, physiologically speaking, are going to be much more vulnerable to the heat than young people. But young people, what this came out with, and I don't have a plot to show it, but that males in particular, generally males from age 18 to 44, the rates were highest for that group there. Okay, and so anyway, this is a way of really effectively identifying who's really vulnerable to the heat. Now, there are other factors that played into this, and so a lot of the areas in which the rates of heat illness were high are also rates in which the rates of poverty are quite high. And I should also mention here too North Carolina and South Carolina and the broader Southeast, we know there's a high percent of people who live in manufactured homes here. And you can see here this sort of area in the coastal plain. So the coastal plain, North Carolina, going down to Georgia, and also North Florida, counties that have an exceptionally high number of manufactured homes. That is very much geographically associated with these areas in the coastal plain. And if we had a detailed map of manufactured homes, you would see a high degree of spatial correspondence here. So what the short of all this is that these areas where people are more exposed because they're working outdoors, a lot of these people are living in poverty. A lot of them are in manufactured homes and that don't have very good insulation. They're going to have window air conditioning units, which are really inefficient. I could also show you a plot that shows counties that have a lot of what's called energy poverty. So where a high proportion of the money that they make ends up going into paying in the summertime, basically paying for their air conditioning. And so very sadly, a lot of people, they just can't afford to run their air conditioner very much. Okay, and so anyway, so sadly it's almost a perfect storm in terms of heat illness. And as probably a lot of you know, there are really identified a lot of issues too with people that are exposed to the heat a lot year in and year out, kidney issues that develop later in life and so forth. Okay, so our work has been focused on what's called wet bulb globe temperature. So we're really, scientists, we're looking to get the best measure of heat stress. We're all familiar with heat index, which we know accounts for air temperature and humidity, but wet bulb globe temperature also takes into account wind speed and solar radiation, and also very importantly, radiation being emitted by the surface. So you can imagine on a really hot day walking across an asphalt parking lot, you feel the heat. Well, you're not so much feeling heat, but what you're feeling is the infrared radiation coming off this really, really hot surface. So that asphalt's acting like a radiator in an old building, okay? And so anyway, wet bulb globe temperature takes that into account. And we know and from our work, there's some really local areas, particularly urban areas, where there's asphalt and concrete that can get very, very hot. And so anyway, so that, as if it's not worse enough, if you're exposed to the sun, you're also being exposed to all this additional radiation that's coming up from the urban, basically from the urban surface there. So so wet bulb globe temperature is basically recognized to provide the most objective or accurate measure of heat stress. Now we developed a detailed climatology of wet bulb globe temperature, and I'm just going to show you this one slide. This just shows the highest daily maximum wet bulb globe temperature. This is sort of averaged out per season. This is a work that looked at it going back to 1981. And a lot of this is not surprising. If I overlaid a map of temperature, it would look pretty similar. But there are some interesting differences with temperature and also other variables. What really stands out, of course, is the mountains. The mountains are being at a higher elevation are cooler. And so their wet bulb globe temperature is not going to be as high. What you can't really see here, and what's really relevant, is in the coastal areas, wet bulb globe temperature actually goes down somewhat because you get a cooling sea breeze. So the temperature is lower during the hottest time of the day. But what we've learned with wet bulb globe temperature is that wind matters a lot. And so on the hottest days, small decreases or small increases in the wind can make a big difference. So getting a bit of ventilation really drives down the heat stress a bit there. And so saying this another way, really the most dangerous areas are the areas a little bit inland from the coast, areas that the sea breeze often doesn't penetrate into, or the air in the sea breeze has been so modified it doesn't really matter. So you go inland a ways where there's not as much wind, where the air on a lot of days, particularly in late summer, is relatively still. And also too, as you know, a lot of these are wetland areas, and so the humidity is going to be higher. So it's kind of a worst case scenario. Slightly higher humidity, temperatures are quite high, and there's not much wind. One thing that kind of surprised us, we kind of figured, well, you would get down in Georgia and you would see a bit more than say in North Carolina, but generally there isn't much latitudinal variation along the coast. The most dangerous areas that we found are over here in Southwest Alabama and a few places that goes off the map here. into basically into Mississippi. But generally, you can go from South Florida all the way to Southeast Virginia. And when you look at wet bulb globe temperatures, at least during June, July, and August, there really isn't much difference. And there's a number of days in which down in South Florida, they get more wind. The temperature is going to be a few degrees cooler. Now, humidities are going to be higher, but in the net, it can be wet bulb globe temperatures can be slightly below that. Now, what this map really it can be misleading is that there's tremendous local scale variation in wet bulb globe temperature. And so I already pointed this out. So this is a very generalized product here. Okay, and so I'm going to go away from that for a second. I'll say a few more things about that here in a bit. But I want to illustrate now our tool for predicting wet bulb globe temperature. You can see the web link to it right there. But basically, it takes National Weather Service gridded forecast. These are forecast grids are, I think, 2.5 by 2 kilometer forecast grids. And so it takes these hourly forecasts going out to 5 days, and then it provides an estimate of the wet bulb globe temperature. So we have a sophisticated formula that we use to come up with a very good estimate there. And so the user interface is very simple. You just basically pop your location in the box, or if you're geographically wise, you can point out your location. We've learned that about 99% of people put their location in the box. So more and more people, particularly young people, they don't really know where they are anymore. But anyway, it's very simple. So you basically pop your location there, you hit the submit button, and then what you end up getting here is a forecast of wet bulb globe temperature. And I'm going to go to the next slide. Whoops, and I guess I didn't blow that one up. So I'll just kind of explain this here a little bit. So the lighted area here is basically the 5-day forecast. So this is a forecast basically made on Thursday. So if you go to this tool and it's Thursday, what you get here is a forecast for the rest of Thursday and Friday going into early the next week. And the black line here shows that forecast. The shading in the background indicates the degree of danger, or what they call flag levels. And the black flag level is the most dangerous level. And in high school athletics, for example, if you get to 90 degrees or greater in North Carolina, that means you can't practice. You cannot practice at all. And if it's in the red zone, then football players can't work out in pads. They have to take frequent water breaks. And so there's very strict guidelines around what they can do and what they can't do. OSHA also has very strict guidelines that relate to wet bulb globe temperature. Okay, and so here's just an example. So this is for North Carolina. So 90 degrees or above, you have to suspend practice. If the wet bulb globe temperature is less than 80, then there's nothing that you need to do. I mean, just obviously need to be really attentive to see if anybody is beginning to struggle with the heat. One thing that confuses a lot of people, and it might be confusing you now, is the scale here. So wet bulb globe temperature being 90 or above, that's the most dangerous category. Well, living here in the Southeast, 90 degrees in the afternoon is not unusual at all. Well, wet bulb globe temperature is on a different scale, okay? And that's something that's really requires learning there. And we want to roll this out to the public at some point. And that's going to be, I think, the biggest challenge, because you say it's 90 degrees, people think, well, I need to be careful, but it's not really that bad. But in terms of wet bulb globe temperature, 90 degrees or above is really dangerous. Okay, and so that's an illustration of one tool. Another tool that we have, and this is by far our most popular tool, it's called Climate Perspectives, and you see the web address there. But basically, it's a tool that assesses the ongoing and recent state of the climate for weather stations across the Southeast. We've also expanded this tool outside of the Southeast, at least for major cities. But what it does is it provides a fluid perspective on the magnitude of temperature and precipitation anomalies across different periods. Generally what it does is it tells you, how is the recent weather and climate, how does it compare with the past? So if it's been a real hot period, you can look at this tool and it'll tell you, okay, it was like the second hottest for this time of the year in a record, maybe going back to the 1940s. So it gives you lots of statistics on just how unusually hot it was. The tool also identifies basically the closest historical analog. So let's say it's the middle of the summer and we've had some record-breaking heat on individual days, but you know it's been a really hot July. And so what this tool can do is it can tell you, it can compare the month of July with Julys during previous years to identify, well, how does it compare? Was it the hottest? If it wasn't, what year was the hottest? What were the top 5 or what were the top 10 years in terms of heat? We find this really useful in an instructional sense because with the warming climate, what you will find is that there's a number of locations in which the top 10 hottest Julys or whatever, a number of them have occurred in the last 10 or 20 years. So you can see that later years really clustering up, you know, that basically get high ranks there. So that's a ready way for pointing out, you know, one of the big influences there of climate change. So here's just kind of an example here. This is one I pulled from this area here near Raleigh. I don't have time to go through the details of it. This looks rather complex. This is very rich, but it's relatively simple and it defaults to the current day. So up here, you got the most recent day. You could click on this and go to the prior 2 weeks, I believe. You choose, there's predefined cities you can choose from, or you can click on the Google map here and identify an area and see where the nearest stations are. So basically, you select your station, you select the day, and then you hit update forecast, the forecast perspectives here. And then what you get here is this colorful chart. And so what this basically shows here is that for this particular day, it gives you the max temperature, the min temperature, and then it basically tells you how it departs from the normal. So this was an exceptionally cool day that occurred here. It was only got up to 68 degrees. And so that was almost 11 degrees below normal. That ranked as the 10th coolest. That's the seasonal equivalent of being March 30, basically March 31st. So this was a climate perspectives taken recently here on May 9th. And so it's basically saying you have to go back, you know, more than 5 or 6 weeks, that's what the coolness was like. The low temperature was anomalously cool too, almost 9 degrees below normal, ranking it as the 21st coolest. The sort of seasonal equivalent is April 9th. And then putting those two together, the 68 and the 47, the geographical equivalent would be Detroit, Michigan. So in terms of temperature, you can say that the Raleigh-Durham area experienced temperatures more akin to Detroit, Michigan for this time of the year. And so this goes back, so this is just for the current day, you go the past 2 days, going all the way back, and I didn't have enough to put on the screenshot here, but you can go back to the past 2 months, you can go all the way back to the last 2 years. And so we go to the past 2 months, 2 months, this will be early March to early May. The temperatures were somewhat above normal, and it's most equivalent to Wilmington, basically Wilmington, North Carolina. Okay, and so we had temperatures more akin to Wilmington, North Carolina than Raleigh-Durham, and we're of course seeing this more, that our typical temperatures, what we experience, are more akin to what places that are basically farther to the south. Okay, and so just say a little bit about our current work here. So we're interested in building a geospatial database that's more granular, that overlays basically physical variables. This would be climate vulnerabilities with social vulnerabilities. So identifying areas, you know, how frequently they experience high temperatures, extreme precipitation, high winds, tornadoes, and then mapping that on top of social vulnerabilities. So there's census variables that you can see there, like household income, race, unemployment. I have a PhD student that's looking at premature labor and correlating that with the heat, with the hypothesis that the warmer it is, the more women go into premature labor. She's looking at it across race, and also looking at healthcare, the nearest healthcare facilities. So there's all these variables around social vulnerability, and what we're seeking to do here is to marry that with weather and climate data. And of course, there's, as a lot of you know, there's been a tremendous amount of work done on social vulnerability. But one weakness of that work is the fact that it's a lot of it's geared just around social vulnerability. It doesn't match it with weather and climate data. But this is one in which we're seeking to look at it, this vulnerability individually across different hazards. So looking, at the geographical footprint, for example, of heat stress or flooding, hurricanes, the imprint there, the social vulnerability for each of these is going to be a bit different. And of course, it's going to depend on exactly where people live. When we talk about high winds, for example, areas that are more exposed to winds, they're going to have stronger winds, and if they have trees around their house, that makes them more vulnerable. If they live in manufactured homes, that makes them more vulnerable. So what we're seeking to do is to overlay all these different variables here and come up with a more a sort of a much deeper perspective on social vulnerability, or basically a social vulnerability that's tailored to these different extremes. This is something that Maggie produced years ago, but just to kind of give you a sort of map perspective. So this is where she looked at heat-related illness, and then she's overlaying it with mobile homes or manufactured homes here, and she found a pretty significant correlation. And so this is going down to what are called ZICTAs, a zip code. These are at the zip code level, and that's adapted from Census American Community Survey data there. So, okay, so that's just kind of a quick run through. I wanted to leave plenty of time there for questions. So again, thank you very much for this, and I'll basically take off my screen share.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Konrad. Thank you for sharing. I will open it up for any questions. There was one question I did see in the chat from Carrie, who's with the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. I think I got it, all the acronyms, all the words right in that. Is there a publication or other report from the heat-related illness study that you could share?
Sure. So we've done. So I mentioned Maggie Sugg. So we have a couple of publications from that work. So I'd be happy to share that, or I can send it to you, Meredith, and that can be forwarded, I suppose.
Yeah, that would be great if you want to send it to me, and I can share that out to our listserv. Thanks, Carrie. One question I did have, while others, feel free, everyone, to put your questions in the chat, or you can come off mute, but one question I have, I'm interested in the geospatial database that you guys are working on. Who would be able to access that database, and who would be able to use it?
Well, so we're funded by the government, right? By NOAA, and so when we get this thing developed, anybody can use it. And this is, as you can imagine, is a multi-year effort, and we certainly want to engage people in the process of its development. So we'll be, sending invites out, for that. We're still very much in the design phase of it right now. So
yeah. Great. Yeah, very, very good. Thank you. And Carrie has a question. Raise your hand. Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah. Sorry, thanks. And I'm sorry if I jumped in front of someone. I didn't see another hand. Yeah, so this, your climate and social vulnerability work looks really interesting. And obviously there's a lot of work in this space. I'm just curious if there's attempts to kind of connect this kind of work with, for instance, the, environmental justice, screening tools that are coming out of, in conjunction with the Justice 40 work. Or just, I guess I'll just leave it there. I mean, if this effort is being connected with other efforts to try to identify vulnerable communities, especially in order to, direct resources to try to right some of those injustices, I guess, or deal with some of those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question to bring up here, and this is very much in its infancy now. And that's unquestionably something that we want to do. I will mention I'm working with a scholar right now in my department who studies Black towns and the legacies of Black towns. And I have a PhD student who's very interested in this. And so she's one of the, one of the students who's going to be working on the development of this database. And so we want to incorporate as much as we can here. And so, yeah, and so we really want to pinpoint these areas. And I think, the value that we hope to be able to add to this is that we can get more granular and really go down, I mean, even below census tract possibly in some of these, and look at where houses are located, the type of houses and so forth. I was talking with another colleague in my department yesterday who's very interested in houses in the Southeast and their basically the materials that they're made of, exactly where mobile homes or manufactured homes are. Some of these are getting quite old too. Where are they located exactly? And when we have inland moving hurricanes or even hurricanes moving along the coast, they're exposed to winds and there's trees around. We have, a lot of loblolly pine that grows quickly. So we really want to try to get granular and try to really isolate pockets that are, especially vulnerable. But in terms of environmental justice too, that we can look and, we can see what these areas are. And there's a lot of these small unincorporated black towns that are really, suffering in a big way. So the hope there is that we can really build on a lot to that and provide a lot of evidence on a more granular level, what's going on there.
Great, thanks.
Great, thank you. Thanks. And okay, great. And this is similar. I had a question similar to just what was posted to Erin in the chat. She says, thank you for all your impactful work on heat stress. I wondered if the organization SERCC pairs any of the data analysis with discussions, recommendations for corresponding policy agendas, or if you mostly focus on the data piece.
Yeah, I mean, we're into obviously the data, but very importantly, building tools from that data that are going to help people. We also too, we build climatologies and again, what we seek to do here is kind of build these climatologies on a more granular level so that we can really see, what their impacts are. But that's really the space that we're in. But it's very important though that we do interact with decision makers, particularly too in terms of tool development, because they're the ones using the tools. And so we want to make sure that our tools are usable, that they make sense, and also too that the information, the contextual information that we have in the tool is helpful so that the tool gets used in, in the most effective way.
Great. And then similar, this is kind of a follow-up question. This is a question I had too, more about policies and maybe what's happening in the state of North Carolina. But Lindy has a question here, just wondered similarly, any sort of policies for the state for outdoor laborers or to protect workers?
I know a little bit about this in North Carolina, that there are some policies, but as I understand it, I think that there's some real challenges with enforcement of some of these policies. There's strict policies, I understand it, in indoor environments, OSHA requirements, for example. But outdoors, it is a big challenge, and particularly on these produce farms, and where workers are basically paid by how much crop that they pick per hour, and so that's a real challenging area. And I know the labor division of North Carolina is really on this and trying to work more with the modest resources they have to enforce. And I don't know what the regulations per se are on that, but I just know that there's a big focus on it.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, thank you, Dr. Konrad, for being here today and explaining the work that you guys have previously done and the current work that you're working on now. Really appreciate you joining. I'm going to share my screen just so you all have Dr. Konrad's information. You can jot down real fast his email address. I'll put right here quickly. And then Just within the last 2 minutes, if you logged on late, something I did just want to highlight one more time, just to drive it home, is our next meeting, our June partnership meeting. We will be discussing the importance and role of, excuse me, public-private partnerships in disaster resilience and climate adaptation. And we'll be talking more about specifically what SCDRP is doing and the goals and objectives that we'll be working on. And we really invite you to send this meeting once we have our newsletter sent out. Encourage your colleagues and share with your networks, so we can share more about what this partnership is doing. And so with that, thank you again, Dr. Konrad, and thank you all for joining, and we will see you next month. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.